Thank you, Donald. Well, we have a crisis in our prisons. In fact, we have many crises in our prisons, but one of them is sheer numbers. Now, if you look at the sort of history of this, since the end of the war, our prison population rose pretty much in line with the population rising. And by 1990, there were 45,000 people in British prisons. But the number now is 85,000. And yes, there are 10 million people more in the country than there were back in 1990, but it is a very dramatic rise. And to try and deal with this problem, today the Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, said this.
The idea that our prisons are too full for us to meaningfully reform the offenders within them. I think that's a counsel of despair. It's certainly true that reoffending rates are too high and that our prisons are too violent, and I acknowledge that. But the wrong way to address that would be to shorten sentences or release offenders early. That would be reckless and it would endanger the public. And it would restrict the freedom of the independent judiciary to choose the most appropriate sentence for each offender.
What is she talking about? On the one hand, Liz Truss is telling us that these are bad people, dangerous people. They can't be let out into society without serving their sentences. And on the other, will somehow manage to keep the prison population where it is through a system of reform, all of which seem to me to be fairly indefinable. I've looked at this graph going back to 1945. The average growth per annum is about 3.4%. Surely, if our prisons now are chronically overcrowded, and at least 20,000 prisoners are living in really seriously overcrowded conditions, surely the answer is we should build more prisons. What other possible answer could there be? And I want to hear from you, and particularly if you've been in prison, you know somebody in prison, you work or have worked in the prison service. Can we go on the way we are? To get involved in this conversation, please call me on 0345 60 60 973. You can text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can watch the show live on LBC's Facebook page. And I'm doing all of this live from Strasbourg. And our first caller of the evening is Amy in Hove. Amy, 85,000 people in our prisons, overcrowding. Should we simply build more prisons?
Yes, basically.
Yes.
Absolutely right. What is the issue? I don't understand with not building more prisons. I don't know why that isn't just a perfectly sort of commonsensical idea. I know that's not a good word, but
let me give you, Amy, a commonsensical answer. Maybe it is a good word.
Trumpish.
Well, it's catching, isn't it, this Trump stuff? And he would have, in fact, he would have sounded a bit like Liz Trump today about bad people being let out. I think, Amy, the answer is dead simple. I think it's called money, isn't it?
Well, obviously we talk about money, but I mean, it just seems to be how much money is. Actually, money is a big issue with everything, and they need to figure out how to spend it better. But really, this whole idea of releasing people who are, before they're supposed to be released, it just sort of defeats the whole purpose of sending people to prison. And there also seems to be an issue with people thinking that it's something to do with it's supposed to be a punishment. It's not meant to be reforming or, it's a punishment to go to prison. If you break the law, you go to prison. And how letting people, who do you decide to let go early? I don't get it.
Well, surely, Amy, the point is that, yes, it is a punishment, but also, if you can reform people when they're in prison, they might not reoffend.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an argument there somewhere, isn't there?
Yes. No, yes, obviously. But, I mean, the main idea of prison is to take away your freedom because you've broken the society's laws. Obviously, reform is great, but the number one thing is people go to prison as a punishment. They get their rights taken away. And what I don't understand is when we have an increase in population, we obviously are going to have an increase in crime. I mean, unfortunately, the two seem to go hand in hand, and yet nobody seems to talk about building more prisons. They just talk about letting people go early, which doesn't make any sense.
Amy, you're perfectly logical. What was illogical was Liz Truss saying, we're not going to let people go early, and yet we'll manage to maintain the prison population where it is. Frankly, she was whistling in the wind. I found what she said today to be weak and totally and utterly illogical. Amy, I thank you for your call.